Welcome, Heartache Connoisseur listeners. This is your humble host, Marty Carpenter, MD, just a country psychiatrist out here in flyover country doing the Lord's work today. Another beautiful day in Iowa. It's the springtime and the wildlife is out and about, especially the, what are they, gophers, ground squirrels? I don't know what they are. I don't know what the proper name is, but they're burrowing and tunneling in my yard. And I've put off for several years taking any serious action about this because come on, they're cute, they're fuzzy, I've got kids, I don't want to accidentally poison the dog. But they just are making a mess every year. And now my driveway's starting to sink a little bit, and I'm concerned that they're burrowing out under the driveway, making it hollow, and it's starting to sag. So I went to my local big box home store, and I bought a package of gopher gassers. That's what I did. They look like really long firecrackers, but they're smoke bombs. And you light them and you jam them in the hole, and it makes this putrid, toxic, poisonous smoke that, runs them out, poisons them, gasses them, whatever. And I did this, and several days later, all of the little holes were back. And I did it again, and several days later, all of the little holes were back again. So obviously these things don't work. Now I've got a lovely poodle, and I'm really not comfortable with putting anything out there that he might want to eat. So if any of you have any ideas out there, what I could do, is this a trapping situation? I'm not going to sit out there like a Hatfield or a McCoy with a rifle waiting for them to pop up their head and take pot shots from my porch. I'm not going to do that. This is a nice neighborhood. But if you have other ideas that don't involve me in, bib overalls and missing a tooth and a red bandana hanging out of my back pocket, I'd love to hear your strategies. So, what else? Chainsaw update. It's totaled. My Stihl chainsaw is totaled. I took it to the local fix-it shop, and they tore it all apart, and something with the rods and something with about $1,000. So it's done, which makes me sad. I mean, for one thing, you I loaned the saw to a guy. I have no idea what he did to it, and I'm not going to ask him because it's just going to embarrass him, and I know he doesn't have $1,000 to fix the saw, so whatever. But I don't know. Now I'm in the market for a new Stihl chainsaw, and that one was a little big, honestly. I mean, I'm out there in my yard cutting down, homeowner size problems with a professional size saw, which is, it's a little much and it makes you tired quick, but man, does it feel good to wield that thing. But I'll probably be in the market soon for a little smaller saw. I prefer to buy things from their professional line because they're just sturdier. And the guy at the shop, he's like, "This never happens. I don't know what he did. Maybe he didn't put oil in the gas and it got too hot and whatever." But anyway, today I wanted to talk to you about the pout, the pity party, the brood, and the butt hurt. Ladies and gentlemen, I am a master pouter. It worked on my mother really well when I was young, so I got really good at it. I was able to use my lower lip to basically procure action figures, baseball cards, candy, trips to the park or the pool or whatever it was that I fancied in the moment. And to this very day, when the situation calls for it, I can call upon the powers of the lower lip, and I can use it on weak-minded people. No, Mom, I know you love me. I was your only biological child. You couldn't help yourself. I get it. And, it's not your fault. I've worked through it. I've worked through all the damage that you did to me by giving me my way. So I wanted to define some of these terms because there are slight differences, and one leads to another, which is kind of fun. But pouting it's basically it's like a low feeling. It's a self-righteousness. It's an entitled feeling. It's extremely self-serving behavior. It's intended to punish others through passive-aggressive silence or communicate anger through body language, withholding affection, withholding eye contact. And by definition, it's undignified, it's manipulative, and it's controlling. And when we're pouting, we often do this other thing called brooding. But brooding is really adding fuel to the fire. That's ruminating or chewing on or gnawing on the way that you feel hurt and adding fuel to that fire. Yeah, and they're like this, and they always do this, and they never do this, and I'm always this to them, and they're never this to me. That's brooding. And the pity party is when we sit around and we feel sorry for ourselves for the ways that we're hurt. And oftentimes we invite others into that. We call a friend and tell them negative things about the perceived enemy or the person that hurt us. We gossip and slander behind one's back, and we have a little pity party. I try having those, but nobody comes. Nobody comes to mine anymore. Just sit there all alone with my little cup of tea. For some of you in our audience, you may not know what this term "butt hurt" is, but I hear this in my office sometimes. People will come in and say, well, my wife said this to me and it got me all butt hurt, So I had to look this up in the Urban Dictionary. I use this Urban Dictionary quite a bit in my line of work because the kids these days, they have a lot of slang that I don't know anymore because I'm not cool at all. I don't even think it's cool to say cool. I think you're supposed to say like dope or I don't know. We'll have to ask Cooper, who was my guest a couple of episodes ago. He knows all that lingo, but maybe he can leave a comment or something about what the proper terms are for cool and rad and dope and sweet, things like that. But anyway, this butt hurt concept is essentially it's very similar to pouting. It's kind of you getting your nose out of joint. That's what my dad always used to say. He's like, he got his nose out of joint. For feeling slighted over something that's usually relatively minor that we're making a big deal out of. And so about this concept, when we're pouting, it's this state of feeling owed something. It's when it's not going our way. It's when we've been denied or we perceive an insult or an injustice. And it kind of requires two people, doesn't it? Pouting by yourself is it's a sort of a waste of time, isn't it? I remember my parents tell this story about me as a toddler. It's sort of pouting. It's more of a tantrum story, but they're pretty similar. Pouting is kind of an older kid / adult version of a tantrum. But I don't know what I was upset about. I was upset about something. And my parents were in the room there with me, and I laid down on the floor, and I'm kicking and screaming and pounding the carpet and all this. And they decide to just calmly get up and go to another room. I promptly stopped my tantrum. I stood up, and I toddled into the room where they were now sitting comfortably and politely, and I laid down on the floor in front of them, and I resumed full strength the tantrum with the kicking and the screaming and the pounding of the floor. So this pouting and the behaviors associated with it are definitely for the benefit of someone else in order to achieve an outcome that we want. It usually is basically either to punish someone and let them know how unhappy we are. So what has preceded this pouting or being butt hurt? It could just mean that an appropriate boundary was set with us. It could mean that somebody told us no or made a truthful comment to us and that we didn't handle it very well. That's one possibility. It definitely could also mean that somebody was rude. It could mean that. We're not really talking. I'm not talking about abuse in this one here, people. I'm not talking about, he comes home drunk and he smacks me around and calls me terrible 4-letter words and, uses me. And that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the normal everyday interactions that we have with our spouse and coworkers and our kids and that sort of thing. I've learned a lot about this from watching my kids. It's common. It's normal. Children, I love you. I'm not going to name names here, but this is a common occurrence. I mean, this is something that happened even yesterday. We were talking about the video games that we were going to be playing later. I was picking them up from school, and one of my children says, you haven't been setting a timer for my brother, and he gets to play, and you make me stop when the timer goes off. And I'm like, well, you might have a point there, actually. So I actually granted him his point, but he was still mad about it and continued to pout about it for, I don't know, another couple of hours. And so we had to run to Costco to get some stuff for dinner, and he's just, his arms are crossed and he's stern-faced, and you ask him a question and you get the one-word answer, and he's wandering a little too far into other aisles to let me know he's displeased and all this. Now, eventually it works itself out, and they're all fine again, and nobody played any video games last night at all. So that's my response to it. It's sort of like anytime that I'm met with pouting, it makes me just want to withdraw every privilege that there is until they get figured out how good they have it. But it's funny, but it's also worth taking seriously, because pouting in relationships especially has some pretty serious consequences. And it can lead to some recurrent self-destructive patterns, and patterns that are also destructive to the relationship. It alienates us from our partner. It steals our joy. It wastes time, and it also entrenches false beliefs we have about what we're entitled to and how wrong they are, and it just kind of. I mean, I think the biggest one that I think is troublesome is, as I age and the way I see life now, is that every minute you spend pouting with your nose out of joint, brooding, having a pity party, or feeling butthurt, every minute you do that is a minute you just missed out on what could be an amazing life. You stop seeing the wonder and the beauty around you. You stop being thankful. You stop noticing the birds and the trees, the taste of your food, your lovely home, all forms of entertainment, books, relationships, huge giant movies and big air-conditioned rooms on big screens for our pleasure and entertainment. I mean, this is what we do. We prefer, in that moment, what we're doing is we're choosing misery. We're choosing misery because it seems preferable to us in that moment. It's like my kids, it's like, well, okay, I'm going to go ahead and pout about my brother getting to play a few more minutes of video games than me, missing the big picture, which is I have video games at all. I have the ability to, in my hands, hold this device that entertains me while we're driving across the Midwest and its boring landscapes, and I can put on headphones and look at this thing and completely zone out, and 4 hours can go by and I don't even know what happened. I'm going to go ahead and forget about that reality. So that's what we do. We choose irritation over connection. We make the message we're trying to send to the other person the most important thing in our life in that moment. Now, a few pointers. Let's dissect this. Once we're in this headspace, and it is a headspace, and it's a temporary headspace, but there's some things we can do. There's some ways we can see this. So what do we do when we find ourselves in this headspace of pouting? Is there a way out of this? Do we have options besides just using our pouting to send a message or punish someone else. And yes, I think we do. And I think it's our responsibility as we become adults to choose something different than pouting. And I would say, though, first and foremost, have compassion for yourself. You're human. We all get our feelings hurt. We all get bent out of shape. We all struggle with senses of entitlement, and it's just normal. And I think it's important to just give yourself the time you need. I mean, if you really get hurt, sometimes you just need to separate yourself, and I would strongly encourage that versus engaging in punishing behaviors. But you may just need to take the time you need to work through your own feelings. And I think it's important to go ahead and lean into those feelings, feel them. It's okay to be angry, but it's in the name of pursuing the truth about what you're really upset about. What am I really upset about in this moment? In the kids' case, I don't think it's so much about the video games. It's about fairness, for example. It's about being on high alert that my sibling might get a little bit more than me, and what that could mean about my place in the family, and what it might mean about the way my father feels about me, and what it means that I'm in this ongoing rivalry with my sibling, and any edge that they get in any area threatens my sense of self-worth. That's what it really means. It's not about the video games exactly. And I have empathy for that, and I realize that that's a process of maturing that's going to take some time for that to all get worked out. You need to allow some time for this to dissolve. It's like once we get into that headspace, it is impossible to instantaneously snap out of it. And I think sometimes as parents, we need to remember that too, that once our kids get into that headspace, they do need a little time. And this can be, you don't have to scream and shout at them. It's not going to help. But maybe you do require a little time alone in the room or whatever, sequester them a bit and let them work it out. And I think that's the appropriate thing to do. You don't want to humiliate and pick and make fun. And that just, that really adds insult to injury. It's important not to build a case. I mean, that's the brooding, and that's the temptation, is just to start to put together a list of reasons why we're right and the other person's wrong, and how what they've said to us is so offensive and they're so terrible. And we do this. And the minute you feel like you're in a courtroom or you're an attorney and you're putting together a set of arguments that you're going to take and litigate against this person, then you're missing the point. This is where we pause and we have compassion for the other person, and we say, look, nobody's perfect. Perhaps I'm misinterpreting what even happened. Maybe I haven't taken the time to find out what they really even mean, or if they were being overtly offensive to me on purpose, would a better strategy be to simply look them in the eye and say, straight-faced, with kindness, I don't appreciate being talked to that way. Would you please stop that? That's what we could do instead. And it's sort of like the less mature we behave, the less mature your partner's going to behave. Somebody has to take it to the next level of maturity, where, if you make the family culture one where we have conversations, we say what we mean, we don't run each other down, are honest about our feelings, and we're kind when we confront things, that's going to bring everybody up. And the minute you start this pouting deal, you're bringing everybody else down with you. Another strategy that I'll use when this happens to me is that I try to get busy doing something else. I mean, everything in me wants to sit there and brood and build the case and have a pity party and all that. But as I've aged, I've figured out I'm way better off if I just start doing an activity that takes my mind completely away from whatever it is I feel hurt about in the moment. And maybe it's playing a video game or going to my wood shop or something, so, going to the store and buying the groceries for the week or whatever. But you got to do something that takes your mind off of the hurt that you're experiencing too. And then I think after you've given it a little bit of mental space and you've chewed on it a while and then put it to rest, then you can sort out what your feelings are and you can come back around to it later. It may be the kind of thing where if you do find yourself coming out of a state of pouting, that you have this conversation with the other person. Maybe it's the next day, or maybe it's 6 or 7 hours later when everybody's feeling calm again. And you got to resist this temptation to engage in destructive behaviors. I think oftentimes when we're in that state, we feel very justified in engaging in insulting dialogue. We sometimes feel, I think, justified in other passive-aggressive type behaviors. Oh, yeah, well, if you say that to me, then I guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to take the credit card to the mall, and I'm going to have some retail therapy. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to buy myself I don't know, several new pairs of shoes, and I don't care. I don't care what it costs because I deserve this because I've earned it by putting up with your crap. That's sort of the attitude. For example, I think that there's always a spiritual side to all of this. I mean, we can always go. If you're a person who is attempting to have a relationship with God, you can have a conversation with God. And now God has seen this all from the very beginning, right? I mean, it's not like any of this is a secret. He knows your every thought. He knows all of their thoughts. We choose to believe he loves us anyway, in spite of our foibles. And so you can go to God honestly. You can go to God with your feelings, knowing full well they're unfair and entitled and selfish. And you can tell him. And he's not going to reject you. I mean, that's key. I mean, if you can get to a place where you can pray things out loud to God that are BS, then you're getting somewhere in your faith. That shows some intimacy. That shows that you're trusting God to not reject you for being completely human. And that's an important step. And I think it goes like this. You say, look, God, I'm pissed. I know I'm pissed more than I should be, and I could really use some help. And I know that I'm pissed because I'm human and I'm wounded, and this probably is triggering something deeper I may not even be aware of. Could you bring that to my awareness? Could you help me understand what it is that is really going on here? If there are bigger issues with my marriage or with my kids or whatever it is that need addressed, could you show me that? I don't want to live this life fraught with conflict on a regular basis where I'm checked out for several hours at a time, having a pity party, missing out on the blessings you have for me. I don't want to do that anymore. And furthermore, I'm sorry that's been a behavior pattern of mine. Could you show me the way out of that? That's what that prayer ought to look like. You make it about you. And in as much as it's about the other person, it's about forgiveness. And it's about, look, I know they said something that made me self-conscious about my body, and that's painful, and I can have a conversation with them about that, but at the same time, I forgive them. And, I'm willing to do that because you've forgiven me. I mean, you make provision for me and my weaknesses, and I realize that I'm called upon then to make provision for others and their weaknesses as well. And that's what heals right there. It's not getting even. It's not proving your point. It's not showing everyone how mad you are with your lower lip out and your arms crossed and making them do without you and make the whole household awkward or the whole car awkward or the whole weekend ruined because you're going to act pissed and huffy and all this. That's not fair to other people who are attempting to enjoy their lives. And when you take it upon yourself to spread resentment and malcontent, I think that you may even owe them an apology when it's all said and done. I think that's the kind of thing where when you do get your head on straight again, you might approach your family and say, look, I haven't been my best self over the last day or so. I love you all, and it's not been your fault, and I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I drug everybody down. That's the kind of thing that will build depth and intimacy and trust between you and your loved ones. So hey, there it is. pouting, pity parties, brooding, butt hurt. And if this is meaningful to you and you want to be on my team, feel free to go to my website, theheartacheconnoisseur.com. Scroll down to the bottom of the page. There's a link to my Patreon page, and you can make a small donation that helps support the podcast and the marketing and the equipment and the time and all that it takes to put this on. And if you don't feel so moved, enjoy it anyway, guilt-free. I'm glad to have you as a listener. Feel free to make comments on Facebook. Feel free to reach out, request episode topics. If you've got questions, things that you might want to hear a psychiatrist talk about, I'm happy to address that if it's something I feel I can handle. And thank you for listening. Please share it. Feel free to tell your friends about it. A little word of mouth is much appreciated. And to those of you who have been faithful listeners, I really appreciate the time. And there's a lot of choices out there and a lot of ways you can spend your time. So hey, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.